Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Story number 1. The Missing Piece, written by Lbry Father Anthracite. Aether, the power behind nearly every race in the galaxy. It was used to travel, to heal, to build, and tear down. Every race had a name for it. Aether, Grem, Rafiat, Ki, Shah. Whatever you called it, it was everywhere. A source of power, a catalyst for exerting your will upon the universe. It was so infused in our culture, of our ideas of how the world worked, that we never even questioned it. It was a shock to learn that there was a whole species that wasn't able to harness Aether. They couldn't feel it, see it, sense it in any way. They suspected it might exist. Dark matter, they called it. The most abundant resource in the universe. They were like men at the bottom of an ocean who wouldn't drown because they never even knew water existed. Humans were the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy because no other race needed technology. Everyone else just used Aether manipulation. Want to travel to the moon? Easy. Just make a bubble of air in the Aether shell and push it to the moon. But humans, they had to fight for it. They had to invent machines and use ridiculous amounts of resources to build giant rockets that exploded them into space. And the way they finally broke the speed of light barrier. Who even thinks of harnessing a black hole? Medicine was upsetting to learn about. They couldn't use Aether to heal themselves or drive out sickness. Resetting bones, halo harnesses, costs for weeks and months. The elders started to cry openly when they learned about chemotherapy. Poison as a healing agent. It was one of the most insane things that we'd ever heard of. But without Aether, we would never have been able to heal anyone at all. I remember the first time I was on Earth. The place was so strange. The air hurt my lungs, and the sky was so cloudy and dark. And they had these hard-packed paths that went everywhere. Roads, they were called, with great big metal and plastic abominations that they drove along in. Those were terrifying. They ran along the roads with just a few feet of space between them, at such dizzying speeds. Flying was so much better. You could just find a nice open section of sky and zoom off to where you needed to go. But you can't do that without Aether. And it wasn't like there wasn't any around. It was thick on their world. They had never used any, so they had a thicker Aether than just about any other place I'd been to. I remembered thinking, how could they not notice? But time and time again, they were tested, and not only were they oblivious to it, they were barely affected by it. If you tried to fly with a human in tandem, they would simply not get lifted up. The Aether seemed to pass right over them, right through them. If you made a chair float over the Aether, a human could sit on it and be carried by the chair. Otherwise, they would be unable to interact with Aether. We were never able to figure out how it happened that a whole place should develop and never even be able to interact with Aether. What was even more strange was that nothing from Earth, animal, vegetable, or mineral could interact with Aether. A whole world cut off from the most useful tool in all the universe. It was like finding out that there were people who developed a whole civilization without the ability to lift more than a single grain of sand. The tenacity, the indomitable will to learn, accomplish, achieve greatness. What was even more upsetting was that they weren't mad about it. They found out that that was just a mysterious force that flowed through all of existence, and that they alone were without the ability to use it. And do you know what they said? Can't miss what you never had. Oh, they were fascinated, mind you. Their scientists studied Aether, picked apart the mechanisms of how it worked. They conducted endless and ever more intricate experiments. They'd spent hundreds of years gathering information on the use of Aether, despite not being able to use or even see any Aether. They quantified it. They knew how much Aether was used to lift a 1 kilogram weight 1 meter in the air. They called it an SAU, Standard Aether Unit. Flying 100 yards was roughly 125 SAU, plus mass lift. Some people were better at using Aether than others, but we all fell on a bell curve, as the humans call it. The research never ended. They discovered which things were easier to effect and which things required more effort. They designed new ships for interstellar travel and hired other races to power them. They spent millennia just improving everyone's understanding of Aether and developing new techniques and technologies to better and more efficiently harness Aether. The major breakthrough, the Holy Grail they called it, was to design a machine to use Aether directly. It started small, a tiny, blinking light, barely visible. But it bridged the gap. As humans spread through the galaxy, so too did their technology. Technological advances built upon the shoulders of the previous advances, combats that ran on Aether, starliners that were designed entirely by humans. Even personal conveyances were commonplace, though almost all of the other races still chose Aether-powered flight for personal transport. With a combination of human medicine and Aether, most serious illness was eradicated, and recovery times for injuries were at an all-time low. I remember asking a human friend about it once, how he felt about the strange dichotomy of humans in science versus the galaxy in Aether. I'll never forget what he said. We spent thousands of years trying to piece together a puzzle, but we were stuck because we couldn't find all the pieces. Then we met you guys, and you were walking around with all those pieces that we were missing, but no idea what the puzzle was. I'm just glad that we were able to complete the puzzle. End of story. Story number 2. Private Sale, written by Lbry Father Anthracite. You're Mr. Smith. For today, yes. That is easier than my real name for you. You were recommended by Lbry. How do you know her? Said the tall, thin man. He was impeccably dressed and stood straight with his shoulders back. He looked down his nose at the somewhat threadbare radiant in front of him. All it wore was a harness covered in small pouches. A thick fur that covered its body negated the need for traditional clothing. We were roommates at university. That's also where I first saw one of these. I've been fascinated ever since. The creature's eyes passed over the small baskets, each of which held a precious cargo. One, in particular, seemed to catch its attention. I've been saving for so long for one, that when I saw Wen's, I asked her for the introduction. Before we begin, I want to go over some ground rules. Number 1, you must call me if you decide you don't want to keep it. They take considerable time and effort to care for and educate. If you find yourself lacking, I will retrieve it. No questions asked. Number 2, remember, and I cannot stress this enough, these are juveniles, toddlers, really. They have no concept of proper behavior, language, or discipline. You must train them. I'll be checking on their health and well-being. Number 3, any abuse or injury will be grounds for immediate removal. The man's tone was stern. He obviously cared for what happened to his merchandise. The furry alien nodded furiously. It had no intention of angering the man. It had gone through a special training course and gotten permits and licenses. It wasn't about to mess up a lifelong dream. It had taken a massive sum of money, months of paperwork, 3 failed attempts from shady brokers, and finally a personal recommendation. But at last, the time was here. It was well known that humans had intense feelings about these things, more so when juveniles were involved. They were fiercely protective and carefully screened potential buyers. The alien was sure the extensive background check had been performed before it even received a callback. Well then, the man said, much more jovially, as you requested, these are all female. Please feel free to inspect the merchandise. He waved to 2 large men standing behind the baskets, in suspiciously bulging suit coats. They leaned down and tipped over the baskets, and 6 puppies rolled onto the floor. The alien trilled excitedly and dropped to his belly. The puppies, seeing the furry creature flop to the ground, ran over to investigate. The sounds of excited aliens and rambunctious puppies filled the air. After almost an hour, the alien sat next to 5 sleeping pups, with the 6th held tenderly. I assume you've made your choice, then, the man said. The alien simply nodded as it continued to stroke the pup. The man waved, and his assistants gathered the other dogs and put them back into their baskets. An excellent choice. Do you have a name in mind? I can register right now. Petunia. I heard it was a flower from Earth, and she's pretty like a flower. The man smiled as he typed in his compad. After a few moments, he tucked it in his pocket and said, I hope you and Petunia will be very happy. We do not let our dogs go easily. End of story. This is a special thank you to the one, the only, the legendary Eric Hino, who has become the only Tier 6 patron. Just a quick shout out to the T5 peeps. Bob the Dragon, Cat Crab Lobster, Data Magnet, Dark Machine, Try Again 95, Pudic Yol, Astrea the Dreamer, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Athelia, Meridian 117, and Jordan Bucksmorm. Thank you very much. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. There are links down below, both to support this channel and for the author of this fiction. Anyways, I hope you all have a fantastic one, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.